Most people think they're compounding. They're not. Take Marcus. 51 years old, solid income, investing for over a decade. Every few months, he checks his brokerage account, sees the number creeping up, and feels reassured. But when you actually map out his trajectory, something uncomfortable shows up fast. His growth is slow, not broken, not catastrophic. Just slow, and he has no idea why. The issue isn't discipline. It isn't the market. It's structure. Compounding isn't a switch that flips when you open a brokerage account. It's a consequence of something deeper being set up correctly first. In this video, I'm going to walk you through a framework I call the 5-angle wealth architecture, the thing that actually makes compounding accelerate instead of crawl. So what actually has to happen before compounding starts doing what people assume it does automatically? The answer is structural. We're told, invest early, stay consistent, let time do the work. That's not wrong, but it leaves out the part that matters most: how the portfolio is actually built. Most men in their 40s or 50s don't have a portfolio. They have a pile. A few index funds, a stock they liked once, a bond fund someone mentioned at lunch, a money market account sitting idle. Individually fine, collectively incoherent. And compounding doesn't reward piles. It rewards architecture. Think of your portfolio like a commercial building. It might be standing. It might even look good from the street. But if the tenants are mismatched, the leases misaligned, some floors empty and others overloaded, the cash flow never reaches its potential. A real investor doesn't just fill the building, they optimize it. Every unit has a purpose. Every floor has a role. That's what turns growth into acceleration. Your portfolio works the same way. Let's talk about the foundation. The first angle of the 5-angle wealth architecture is what I call the domestic equity base. This is the engine. For most investors in this target age range, this should represent somewhere between 40 and 60% of the total investable portfolio. And the reason it sits at that weight is not arbitrary. Domestic equities, meaning broad exposure to American companies, have historically delivered the most consistent long-term growth of any major asset class over multi-decade time frames. When you hold a diversified basket of American businesses, you are holding ownership stakes in companies that generate real revenue, pay employees, sell actual products, and respond to economic incentives in ways that push value upward over time. That's not a theory. That's the documented result of over a century of market behavior. But here's the nuance that most casual investors miss. The domestic equity base only functions as an engine if it's not contaminated by speculation. If your 40 to 60% core is filled with individual stocks you chose based on media coverage or tips from colleagues, you've replaced an engine with a lottery ticket. The base should be built on broad, diversified exposure, not concentrated bets. Why does this matter for compounding specifically? Because the engine needs to run consistently. You can't restart an engine every time it stalls. You need steady compounding returns over years and decades, and that requires holding positions through volatility rather than abandoning them when markets get uncomfortable. Most investors lose compounding not because the market fails them, but because they fail the market. They sell when things get hard. They reallocate when headlines get loud, and every time they do that, they interrupt the compounding cycle. The domestic equity base, when built correctly and held with discipline, is what gives compounding its staying power. This is the floor from which everything else is built. And as we move to the second angle, you'll see how the next layer doesn't just add returns. It stabilizes everything sitting beneath it. The second angle of the 5-angle wealth architecture is income and yield assets. And this is the element that most men in their 40s and 50s are either underweighted in or have completely wrong. The target allocation here is 15 to 25% of the portfolio. This bucket includes dividend-paying stocks, real estate investment trusts, and other yield-generating instruments that produce regular income regardless of whether prices are moving up or down. Now, a lot of investors in growth mode dismiss this category. They think of yield as a retirement strategy, something you shift into when you're done accumulating. That thinking is a mistake, and it costs people real money. Here's why. Income assets do something that pure growth assets cannot do on their own. They create cash flow inside the portfolio. And that cash flow, when reinvested systematically, becomes one of the most powerful compounding forces you can access. Think about it this way. Every dividend received and reinvested buys additional shares. Those additional shares generate their own dividends. Those dividends buy more shares. The cycle feeds itself. But there's another dimension that rarely gets talked about. Income assets also smooth portfolio volatility. During the stretches when your domestic equity base is getting hit by market turbulence, your income assets are still writing you a check. That psychological stability matters more than most investors admit. Panic-driven selling is the single greatest destroyer of long-term compounding. Anything that reduces the temptation to panic sell is structurally valuable. Income assets provide that buffer. They keep the engine running when road conditions get rough. And that continuity is what allows compounding to stay uninterrupted across market cycles that would otherwise break a less structured investor's resolve. With the first two angles working together, you have growth and stability operating in parallel. But that combination alone won't build the kind of wealth that changes the trajectory of a family. For that, we need to talk about acceleration. The third angle is high-growth sectors. This is your 10 to 20% allocation to technology, innovation, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, clean energy, and small-cap companies that are either disrupting existing industries or building entirely new ones. This is the part of the portfolio where real wealth acceleration happens. Not steadiness, not income, acceleration. And the 10 to 20% weighting is deliberate. It's large enough to move the needle when these positions perform. It's small enough that when they underperform, which they will in certain cycles, the damage is contained and does not derail the broader architecture. Here is where I want to draw a clear distinction. Most people confuse high-growth investing with speculation. They are not the same thing. Speculation is putting money into something you don't understand, chasing a price movement driven by hype, and hoping someone else will pay more for it later. High-growth investing is different. It means taking measured exposure to sectors with identifiable structural tailwinds, understanding what you own and why, and having the patience to hold through short-term volatility because you have conviction in the long-term thesis. Consider the technology sector over the past 15 years. Someone who made a deliberate strategic allocation to broad technology exposure in the early 2010s and held it through market corrections in 2015, 2018, 2020, and 2022 would have seen extraordinary returns. Not because they were lucky, because they were patient and they were correct about the direction of the world. That's what high-growth investing looks like when it's done with discipline. Now, the reason this angle is positioned third in the five-angle wealth architecture is important. Sequencing matters. You build the foundation first. You add stability second. Then you layer in acceleration. If you try to build a portfolio starting with high-growth positions before the foundational architecture is in place, you are building on sand. The volatility of growth sectors can feel manageable when it's sitting on top of a solid base. It can feel catastrophic when it's your entire strategy. This is why structure precedes growth every single time. And that brings us to the angle that most American investors skip entirely, which is a mistake that shows up quietly but painfully over time. The fourth angle is international equity mix. The allocation range here is 10 to 20%. And if you're a domestic-focused investor who has largely ignored this, I want you to genuinely reconsider your position. The United States is home to extraordinary companies and deep capital markets. But it is not the only place where economic growth happens. It is not the only location where innovation is occurring. And as an investor, limiting your exposure to one geography means you are making a concentrated bet, whether you intend to or not. The global economy is a more complex and distributed machine than it was even 20 years ago. Southeast Asia has hundreds of millions of people entering the middle class for the first time. European industrials and healthcare companies are global leaders with decades of operating history. Emerging markets in Latin America and Africa are developing infrastructure and financial systems that will drive decades of growth. These are not abstractions. These are real economic dynamics that manifest in equity valuations over time. More practically, international diversification provides a hedge that domestic equities alone cannot provide. When the American market is experiencing a period of suppressed returns, and historically these periods can last years, international exposure often continues to generate growth. When the dollar weakens relative to foreign currencies, international holdings benefit in ways that domestic positions do not. The combination of these effects means that international equity exposure, held at a reasonable weighting, actually reduces overall portfolio risk while maintaining or even enhancing long-term return potential. That's the kind of structural elegance that a well-built portfolio should always be aiming for. More return for the same or less risk. That's the target. And it's only achievable when you think globally, even if you live locally. The fifth and final angle of this architecture is the one that most people misunderstand. Not because it's complicated, but because it seems boring. And that misperception is exactly what makes it dangerous. The fifth angle is defensive holdings. This includes bonds, treasury instruments, short-duration fixed income, money market funds, and strategic cash positions. The weighting range here is 10 to 30%, and that wide range is intentional because the right allocation within that band depends on where you are in your investing life, what's happening in the broader rate environment, and how much liquidity you need available for opportunities or obligations. Now, here is the thing about defensive holdings that most growth-focused investors get completely wrong. This is not the lazy part of the portfolio. This is not where you park money that you haven't figured out what to do with yet. Defensive holdings serve two purposes that are indispensable to the overall architecture. The first purpose is protection. When equity markets decline, and they will decline, defensive assets either hold their value or increase it. That means the overall portfolio doesn't fall as far, which means your recovery timeline is shorter, which means your compounding is less interrupted. The second purpose is optionality. Defensive holdings are dry powder. They're the reserve you deploy when high-quality assets go on sale during market dislocations. The investor who held 30% in short-duration treasuries going into the market volatility of late 2022 had the ability to buy excellent companies at discounted prices while others were forced to sell. That kind of strategic positioning is how long-term wealth is actually built. Here's the deeper truth about the fifth angle. Many investors think about defense and offense as opposites. You're either playing offense or playing defense. But in a well-structured portfolio, defense enables offense. It's the strategic reserve that lets you be aggressive when the moment is right. Without it, you're always fully deployed, always exposed, and always vulnerable to having the market dictate your timeline instead of you dictating it. This is where I want to issue a direct challenge that I'll connect back to the full framework in just a moment. Pull up your current portfolio right now, or this evening when you have a quiet moment, and ask yourself one question. Can you identify exactly which of these 5 angles each holding belongs to? If you can, you have architecture. If you cannot, you have a collection. And collections don't compound the way architecture does. Here's the word I want you to drop in the comments right now. Structure. Just that one word. Because if you've gotten this far in this video, you already understand something that most investors never fully grasp. And I want to hear from you. Now let's bring this all together, because the 5 angles individually are useful. But the reason the framework is called the 5-angle wealth architecture and not just a 5-part diversification checklist is that the real power comes from how these angles interact. Think about what happens when all 5 are operating correctly. Your domestic equity base is compounding steadily over time. Your income assets are generating regular cash flow that gets reinvested into more positions. Your high-growth sector exposure is accelerating returns when innovation cycles are favorable. Your international equity mix is smoothing out periods of domestic underperformance and capturing global growth. And your defensive holdings are protecting the full structure during downturns while maintaining optionality for strategic deployment. None of these angles is redundant. None of them is doing the same job as another. They operate in parallel, and they cover each other's weaknesses. The domestic base provides consistency. Income provides cash flow and stability. High growth provides acceleration. International provides breadth and hedge. Defensive provides protection and optionality. When those 5 functions are all operating in one portfolio, you have created the conditions where compounding doesn't just work. It compounds on itself. Let me return to Marcus for a moment. The problem with Marcus's portfolio wasn't that he wasn't investing. He was. The problem was that he had no architecture. He had exposure to domestic equities, sure, but it was concentrated in a handful of sectors he understood, leaving major growth categories untouched. He had no meaningful income allocation, which meant no internal cash flow, no reinvestment engine. He had stumbled into a couple of technology stocks, but they were positioned as bets rather than as a calibrated 10 to 20% exposure. He had zero international equity presence. And his defensive holdings were just a savings account that barely qualified as strategic. On paper, Marcus was an investor. In practice, he was a collector. And collections don't build the kind of wealth that changes your family's financial trajectory. Architecture does. The moment Marcus restructured his portfolio around these 5 angles, not adding more money, just reorganizing what he already had, the compounding math shifted fundamentally. Not because the market changed, because his relationship to the market changed. He stopped reacting and started governing. That's what this framework is ultimately about. It's not about picking the right stocks. It's not about timing the market. It's not about finding some edge that most investors don't have access to. It's about building a structure that works whether you're watching or not, that protects you when markets get difficult, that accelerates when conditions are favorable, and that keeps compounding uninterrupted across cycles and years. The investors who build serious wealth over decades are almost never the ones who took the most risk or made the most impressive single bets. They're the ones whose portfolios were structured intelligently enough that time and compounding could do the heavy work. And once you understand that, you stop looking for the shortcut and you start optimizing the structure. Because the structure is the shortcut. It's just a longer, quieter one than most people are patient enough to take. And to make your compound interest journey effortless, we're building the Trip to Wealth Command Center, a Google Sheet system that brings your income, spending, investing, and net worth together in one place. Join the early access list below and secure a discount as an early supporter. Every wealth system needs a strategy, and this is where yours begins. And there you have it, why compounding doesn't work. The 5-angle wealth architecture is built on 5 coordinated principles. A 40 to 60% domestic equity base provides the consistent long-term growth engine that compounding depends on. A 15 to 25% income and yield allocation creates internal cash flow that reinvests and compounds while stabilizing the overall structure. A 10 to 20% high-growth sector exposure accelerates returns across innovation cycles when held with discipline. A 10 to 20% international equity mix captures global growth and hedges domestic volatility. And a 10 to 30% defensive holdings position protects the full architecture while preserving optionality for strategic moments. The deeper truth of this video is this: compounding is not a feature. It's a consequence. It is the consequence of structure, patience, and the refusal to let short-term noise interrupt long-term decisions. If you found value today, I highly recommend watching my next video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, feel free to leave your comment below, especially if this video made you think differently. I appreciate your support more than you know. This content is for educational purposes only and is not financial advice. Please consult with a qualified financial professional before making any investment decisions. Until next time, stay consistent, stay patient, and stay winning. See you in the next one, Money Magician.